when the world has got you down. And
Alzheimer's sucks. It's an equal opportunity disease that chips away at everything we hold dear. And to date, there's no cure. So until there is, we continue to fight with the most powerful tool in our arsenal, love. This is Love Conquers Alls, a real and really positive podcast that takes a deep dive into everything Alzheimer's, the good, the bad, and everything in between. And now, here are your hosts, Susie Singer-Carter and me, Don Priess.
Hi, everybody. I'm Susie Singer-Carter.
And I'm Don Priess, and this is Love Conquers Alls. Hello, Susan.
Hello, Donald. How are you today, mate?
I'm great, thank you. That's terrible. That's a terrible, terrible accent. I don't even know what accent it was, but it was terrible. So thank you.
Mine is circa 1960 something. Chim chimney, chim chimney, chim.
Oh,
chim,
so you were
chiroo.
so kind of Cockney, maybe a cab driver. You were a cab driver, not a chimney
Oh
sweep.
yeah. No, I was
Oh,
a bit
wow.
of a cab driver there.
Wow, you went to the Dick Van Dyke School of Accents?
That's right.
Wow, congratulations.
Oh.
We are a little loopy today.
Okay.
We are loopy.
We're loopy. We're in the editing bay too long. We're like in solitary confinement only with each other.
Oh my God.
It's thank God we still like each other, Don.
Yeah, I know. It's a miracle. It truly is a miracle.
It is a miracle.
But things are going, and they're going along, as they say, and they're going well. I think we're really making terrific progress on our documentary No Country for Old People, and I don't see a light at the end of the tunnel yet. Not yet.
I
But,
do.
Do you?
I see a light at the end of the tunnel. Yeah.
And I know, as everyone says, and oh my God, it's a train. But no, it's not. We see a true light at the end of the tunnel, a very long tunnel.
I never heard of that train coming at you.
Oh, yes.
I didn't...
Yeah, it's a thing. Yeah. Yeah, but it's a train. You know, it's kind of like somebody being
that's terrible.
snarky.
That's such a horrible visual.
Terrible.
That's a horrible visual. That's terrible.
I know.
I never heard of that. That's awful. I'm going to share this
common.
with the audience. I am going to New York next week. I'm excited. I am going to attend the Cantor Fitzgerald Charity Day in New York, which is a lovely, lovely, prestigious event that is based on 9/11 and the tragedy that we had, that Cantor Fitzgerald lost so many of their beloved employees, and right after that,
I think over 650.
yeah, and they created a charity day that is celebrity driven, like A-list celebrities, Robert De Niro and Meryl Streep and Goldie Hawn and Bill Clinton and on and on and on and on, and to raise money for the families who were devastated by this tragedy. And since then, they've actually added more charities to their docket, and the National Consumer Voice for Quality Long-Term Care, who is our fiscal sponsor and our partner in No Country for Old People, and ourselves have been chosen to go and participate with our celebrity sponsor, who is Anna Sophia Robb, and you might know her from one of the films that I co-produced, which was Soul Surfer, about Bethany Hamilton. She's done a zillion things, and we just love her, and we're very, very honored that she's going to be representing long-term care and helping us raise money for quality care and for No Country for Old People. So exciting, and I get to go to New York and wear clothes that are fun and fancy.
And be on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange and everything. You are going to be super fancy.
Yeah. I'm so fancy and New Yorkie.
And our partner Rick Mountcastle will be there.
Yes. And my other partner from my other film that hopefully is going in next year, we're looking at a spring production date for our dramedy called Run, and my beloved partner Barry Nee is going to be there because she lives on the East Coast, and we're going to go out to dinner and we're going to schmooze with the big shots. So exciting.
Woohoo!
So anyway, but today is exciting too because this is like a new area for us with this guest, and I will just pass the ball to you, Dawn, and let you introduce him.
Alzamend Neuro Incorporated is a clinical stage biotech company focused on developing novel products for the treatment of Alzheimer's, bipolar disorder, MDD, and PTSD. Their mission is to rapidly develop and market safe and effective treatments. They are led by CEO Stephan Jackman, who is here today to tell us about some potentially exciting breakthroughs in the treatment and prevention of Alzheimer's disease and other neurological disorders. So to find out more, let's welcome Stephan Jackman. Hello, Stephan.
Hello, how are you guys doing today?
Hi, Stephan. How are you doing?
Hi, Susie. I am excellent. And how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm feeling a little underdressed. You look so nice. If you're not watching, I am a fashionista, but you can't tell because I was rushing this morning. But I am.
You look great.
I am LA chic, and I do have my Love Conquers All's hat on. So
And it's most important. You know that you're wearing jewelry. So yes, you're a fashionista. You showed up prepared.
Thank you, my dear. Yeah, but the ensemble, you guys, if you're not watching, just hit it up on the YouTube. His fit is good.
He is dapper.
It's good.
Thank
yeah.
You're welcome.
Why is no one talking about me?
thank
I don't
I'm
understand.
So anyway,
Don, you look
Stephan. Anyway, well, we're excited to have you, and I think for us this is you're a unique guest for us because we're talking about somebody who is developing, in the pharmaceutical arena, and we're very, I don't know if you know my background at all, but my mom had Alzheimer's for 16 years.
Yes.
And the cocktail du jour during those 16 years was Namenda and Aricept.
Yes. Very familiar.
I'm sure you are. And then, the only other drugs that we talk about are the psychotropic drugs that are being used in the facilities to chemically restrain our loved ones, which is, been going on for too long, like Depakote and, Risperidol and amongst others.
And Habitol with, the vitamin H, where they pretty much are somewhat comatose.
Absolutely.
Yep. So.
Absolutely. And also, I experienced hospice last year with my mom, and that was also another instance where the drugs become the choice of when it doesn't need to be, but because they're understaffed, it becomes their default procedure.
Drug of choice, of course. Yes, to restrain the patient mostly.
Right.
Unfortunately.
And to hasten death. Also, the morphine too.
We definitely have to. Yeah, there's a change that's needed in the system, especially how you care for people when you bring them into the world, but also when they leave the world. So
absolutely,
it's a lot that's needed. Yes,
they're both as important. So first, we like to get personal because we want to know where your heart's at. So
that.
How'd you get to Alzamend? Like, why is this your focus?
So this is my focus because I graduated from college with a mechanical engineering degree. Why? I have no idea. I also majored in steam and nuclear power plant designs. I don't know. I like math and I like science, right?
Just in case.
Great. Exactly. And so I was recruited for a management program in L'Oreal, working on cosmetics globally, and that was great. I said, hey, I like that. I like fashion. I like makeup, and I like looking good, cologne, etc. And 3 years later, I was recruited away by Novartis Pharmaceuticals and said, hey, we have a management program as well. Let's, let you come here and you can learn the business from the ground up. And we're actually helping people. Cosmetics are great. The cosmetics industry was great for, kind of like helping the exterior of a person. But now, pharmaceuticals helping the interior of the person. So I said, this is fantastic. And so I worked at Novartis for, 8 years. They also developed Now I'm having a little bit of an Alzheimer's, an Alzheimer's.
You're having a blonde. You're having a blonde moment.
I'm having a little blockage because Novartis actually developed Exelon. And I don't know if your mom was on that, the Exelon and Exelon
No.
patch. And that was for Alzheimer's. And that was, I think, prior to lecanemab and aducanumab, that was the last drug that was approved in, the early 2000s for Alzheimer's disease. So it was pretty good. And, I think the moment it hit me that I really belonged in this space, I was at, a town hall, that the organization hosted, and, a woman, was there, and we had a drug at Novartis at the time called Gleevec, and she, said, hey, I was a patient in the clinical trial, and I was only given about 4 weeks to live. And I thought that, I was, we planned, she said will was already conducted, her kids, were 2, 4, and 6 years old. And she said, I was ready to go. And she said, I took this drug, on a in a clinical trial, and it just turned everything around within 4 weeks. I mean, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. It was just like, this is amazing. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of drugs that are, not as good for you.
Yeah.
But when you do find those drugs that are, that are fantastic and it really
Right.
does help people and it really does save lives, I mean, it's something that's, it's monumental. It's something unexplainable,
Of
so.
course.
And so, so I said, you know what, this is where I belong. And after being with the organization for 8 years, I wanted to get more, into really, getting my hands and developing it, from a biotech, a smaller organization where you can actually get into the weeds and really help to bring certain drugs that you want to work on in particular, to the forefront. And so that's what led me to Alzamend, and having family afflicted by it too. So I think, it's something that, when I'm sure you've been there when your mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, you're pretty much rendered powerless. When you have to go through the system and like, okay, how do I take care of her? Who's going to pay for the meds and how are we going to get the meds? And, and what happens when she gets to the point when I can't take care of her? What's going to happen?
Yeah. Yeah, all that. All that. And the truth is that, I got very immersed into the Alzheimer's community because of that, and because of my mom's lengthy journey, and because of a film that Dawn and I produced about 7 years ago called My Mom and the Girl with Valerie Harper, and that film really, just rocketed us into the center of this community, and I love it so much. But the frustration that I find that I had it as well is the pharmaceuticals, because at best Namenda and Aricept we think slows the progression down, right? So there's that question of, is it good to slow it down, or because what are we, because the journey can be rough, right? So
The journey can be extremely rough.
it can be rough. So is it good to slow it down, and is it actually working?
If you didn't take it, or did take it, how do you know if it's actually, and what is that? How do you quantify that? Did it slow it down?
Right.
What does that mean?
It's one of those things that, you pretty much have to get to the right, specialist, to work with them to say, is this product actually working? And if it is it working long term? Because sometimes, it works for a period of time and then all of a sudden it stops because your body gets accustomed to it.
Yes.
So it's one of those things is that, do you continue? So you pretty much, it's a cocktail that is ever changing. A lot of times people go to their physicians for whatever ailment that they have, and all of a sudden it's like they give them unlimited refills, and you're like, okay, yeah, but what if it actually stopped working in between at a certain point?
You're so right, because I used to get anxiety attacks, and so I've been on a low dose of Prozac since my 20s. And
Yes.
I got a new doctor. This is a little side trip, you guys, but I
No,
got
it's necessary. It all applies. Trust me.
yeah,
Go
and I
ahead.
was like, I wonder if I need to be on this anymore, and is it working? And it's such a low dose, and my doctor said, well, one doctor said, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. You're fine. You feel good. And Prozac doesn't really have a bad there's not much,
of a adverse
side
events with it.
effects, with it. So, and I had, and for an experiment, I tried to go off it myself. I weaned myself off, and I got what, I don't even know what the term is, but my whole body felt buzzy, like it felt like a little
withdrawal.
Yeah, but it was just like vibrational in your arms and
Yes.
hands and stuff, and it was really that I knew because I tried it a couple times. But anyway, I went off of it, just because my new doctor told me to go off of it, and I didn't really need to be on it. Like I'm fine without it.
For that long.
Yeah, and so, but we don't know. And
Exactly.
and every doctor has a different opinion. Like the one doctor said, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Don't
And
fix
the other
it,
one is
exactly.
saying, and the other one's saying, why did let's deprescribe you.
It was a moment of time, whatever you were going through that period was probably a lot of stress.
Yeah.
And now you no longer have that. So why continue on that journey or on that regimen? It's really unnecessary.
Because we don't know what it's actually doing to our bodies. We don't know. And
Exactly.
so that brings me back to Alzamend. So tell me, and recently we had an announcement of like a breakthrough drug for Alzheimer's earlier in the year, right?
We did
Yeah.
for lecanemab, which is the follow-on drug for basically aducanumab was approved in 2021, and lecanemab is, I think aducanumab was 21% effective, and lecanemab is 27% effective, and so that was approved in January of this year.
And it was, for all intents and purposes, it was a big hoopla, and
Of course.
and everybody was really excited about it. But when I did a little more reconnaissance on it, it seems to me it's not much different than Namenda and Aricept in that it just slows it down the progression. Am I right or wrong?
Pretty much, yeah. You're spot on. I think it's one of those things that, when you think about certain diseases and you think about how a drug is actually how you get a drug to market, it's difficult because there's a lot of space that there's the biotechs are the ones that develop new technology and then hand it over to the larger pharmaceutical company. Yes, the larger pharmaceutical companies tend to focus on certain spaces, but the issue is that there's no money in those spaces. And so you need investors, to invest in those spaces. And when they think that, for the last 20 years, there hasn't been anything new in the Alzheimer's space, it really helps to have something that can actually move the needle, even if it's just a little bit, because that's how you're going to actually get, as you continue to progress in the space, you're going to see within the next 5 to 10 years more investment into the Alzheimer's space. You're going to see, actually potentially a full-on cure for Alzheimer's.
See,
but that's exactly how it happens. Think of HIV. Remember?
Yep.
Back in the 80s, people were just dying left and right. 90s, and then all of a sudden, people started investing in the space, and before you know it, we're at the point now. It's pretty
People are
much
living,
not a
yeah.
death sentence as it used to be.
It's so true. That makes so much sense. Again, it's like we're doing a documentary, I don't know if you know that, called No Country for Old People, which is about our broken nursing home crisis, right? And basically...
We all have stories on that.
Don't we? Yeah, well, sadly, we do. And, and we're our partner on this project, I'm sure you saw it since you're in the pharmaceutical arena, is the lead prosecutor in the pharmaceutical case against Purdue Pharma. So
Really?
yeah, so it's Rick
Did you see
Montcastle,
Dopesick?
and I don't know if you
Yeah,
saw
Very
did you see
nice.
Dopesick? Yeah.
I did.
Yeah.
And most
So-
recently, Painkillers.
Yes,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, which he was portrayed in. He was portrayed in that also. Yeah, yeah.
Yes, he was.
Yeah, but that was a different story. That, like, Painkiller was a bit more, I think, poetically
Fictionalized.
They took a little bit
Fictional-
of yeah.
Exactly. But,
Yeah.
but both range true. So yeah, I think
Yes.
Dopesick is
Yeah, I think they both are very valuable. But his mantra is follow the money. So in any
Absolutely.
business. So it's interesting, I think, to our listeners that that still the reason why we probably don't have a cure is because there's not enough interest in Alzheimer's financially. And that's why we don't have as much progress correct?
in it. So there is enough interest financially. I
Is
mean,
there?
picture it, anyone over 65 that actually have, plaque within the brain, there's a lot of interest. The problem is there's just been way too many failures. That's been the biggest issue. A lot of people have been tracing like what exactly is Alzheimer's? Is it plaque buildup in the brain? Is it just that you just lose memory over time? Is it your immune system? So there've been a lot of things that people have been just like, really researching, and just and time again, these larger pharmaceutical companies have just failed.
They
So
failed.
it's kind of, yeah, they just failed because the endpoints of seeing, like, okay, is this actually something tangible to move the needle that the FDA is going to actually, give you the go ahead to commercialize this product. So that's been the biggest issue.
I think unless you can reverse and reverse to a point where you're not just leaving somebody in a bad stage of Alzheimer's, you could reverse something and take them back to a
Yeah.
worse
Yes.
stage. You literally could. So
Yes.
until that happens, where it basically just gets rid of it or gets you to the point where, oh yeah, I just forget things occasionally here and there. First of all, there's again no way to quantify if it's working or not. I don't know there's a value there unless you actually reverse it or get to a point where it's like, oh, I have Alzheimer's and now
prevent
I'm
it.
stopping it. I'm stopping it right now.
Or
prevention
prevent it.
complete
Or prevent
or
it.
complete prevention.
Well,
Yes.
they have the Alzheimer's cognition scale. So what they do is that when they give you the drug in human clinical trial, they'll test and they want to check and see, your cognition. Is it improving your associative learning? Is it improving, cognition? Is it improving, your just basically irritability, and everything else that that you have going on in your daily life? And if they see an improvement, within that by taking this medication, then yes, and they can say that, if you're moving the dial. And that's more of observational, but then they'll also do basically what the different assays that your blood, they'll check and see like what your levels are within plaque, within the beta amyloid or tau phosphorylation, or basically the oligomers within your blood. But then they'll also do PET scans or MRI to see if that there is a change within the brain. And that's basically what a lot of organizations such as ours are working on. I mean, for us in particular, we have, in our opinion, 2 shots on goal. We have a tried and true drug, which is the next generation lithium, that's already been shown within human clinical trials to slow down the progression of Alzheimer's. It's a drug that's been on the market since the 70s. And, it's been approved for bipolar. It's considered to be the gold standard for bipolar disorder.
Right.
However,
Is it-
it's also
yeah.
used off-label for major depressive disorder and PTSD.
Right.
And lithium is shown in human clinical trials to pretty much reduce the amount of plaque buildup within the brain. And it's also considered to be very neuroprotective, more so that in 2022, the EU, they approved lithium for autism.
Really?
Because of its neuroprotective properties. So what we have in our portfolio and what we're working on is a new version, next generation lithium, that requires less lithium dosage, so it's much safer. So you're not going to see the same side effects, to go into patients with Alzheimer's to reduce irritability and pretty much slow the progression. It would be more along the lines of a maintenance drug that
Gotcha.
can help with irritability, and it can help slow the progression of Alzheimer's. This is more for a mild to moderate Alzheimer's. So if someone has it, let's say you're, 65 to 85, and you have it, it's something that you'll take. Of course, it's not a cure, but at the same time, it can help slow the progression until a cure is actually on the market. But then we have a follow-on drug, which is a vaccine that's a potential full-on cure for Alzheimer's. And what's interesting about our vaccine is that as we get older, our immune system pretty much weakens. And what this vaccine is built on a cancer platform, so it's precision medicine. So we take your blood from your body and we spin out the white blood cells from it. We mix it with our mutant peptide. We create a vaccine tailored to you that we now put back in your body. And what that does, it basically strengthens your immune system to fight and reverse the effects of Alzheimer's.
Interesting. Is this technique done in other kinds of, where you're removing blood and then putting it back
So,
in?
so it's done only, no, it's only done for cancer. It's only done for people who have cancer.
But
And
it,
this,
yeah.
and this particular technique has been proven in a product called Provenge by Dendreon, and it's for prostate cancer. So they're pretty much
Interesting.
using the same, technique,
Right, right.
and platform to pretty much use for Alzheimer's. So
Let's
it's been an uphill battle because we're pretty much treating them as if Alzheimer's is a cancer.
Right, right, right.
But
Well, in a way, it is. In a way, I always,
exactly,
I mean, in my very naive, dumb, like not medical mind, but I have good instinct. I always think of Alzheimer's in a way like cholesterol, like it's. And I know my mom had high cholesterol, and I think that there must be a correlation between high cholesterol and Alzheimer's. It is a plaque buildup, right? So I know it's
exactly,
different kind of plaque, but it's the same. It's the same process that's happening. It's killing. It's smothering.
exactly. And how
It's
do you
building.
clear that up? And
Yes.
also, the current drugs has been approved by the FDA. Unfortunately, they're a one size fit all. So it may work for some, and it may not work for a lot of other people.
Right.
And then there's also side effects that comes with that. And so having a vaccine that's tailored specifically to you, you're not going to see that because it's pretty much treating you with your own DNA. And that cannot be used for someone else. So by creating this vaccine, it's just, hey, this is Susie's treatment only for her. No
Right.
one else can
It
use it.
sounds like it could be very expensive. No? Or
Depending.
yes? Yeah.
Yeah.
Depending on the manufacturing process, but being that we've had a lot of experience of being caregivers in general, we try to partner with organizations that can maintain a low manufacturing cost.
My sister has MS. She cannot afford the medication. She can't afford the, what is it,
Yes,
$7,000 a month. So she just doesn't take it. And I think that's with most people, or insurance won't cover it. And so, we see the promise of this, but if you can't afford it, what's the purpose? And how do you safeguard, like you say,
Right.
you
well,
partner with other companies that would maybe keep that down, but how do you get it to a point where everyone can use this?
I think Alzheimer's is a different space than MS. Alzheimer's right now, just in 2023, is projected that the government's going to spend over $289 billion, on Alzheimer's care and medication. So having a treatment on there that's a potential cure, it justifies. I mean, technically, you can just hand out to everyone for free because you're pretty much taking away you're absorbing the burden from the government,
Right.
in
Yeah, that
general.
makes
Right.
sense.
So
That
that
makes
kind of
sense.
justifies it. So that's why, it's kind of like it's good to go off the Alzheimer's space. The problem with when you think about MS, unfortunately, that's not the same case. But I think most pharmaceutical companies, and don't quote me on that, but I think most have some kind of a patient advocacy program. And I
Yes,
don't know
they
if your
do.
sister have actually reached out, to say like, hey, I have MS, I'd love to take your medication, but I just can't afford it, and they'll provide her with
Yeah.
with
With the
basically
drug, yeah.
vouchers and with the drug.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
did that
because
for my
because
mom. We did that for my mom with Aricept because Aricept was really
yes.
pricey at the time. And I also did it because I get migraines, and I did it for Relpax at the time because Relpax they now have a generic, but when I started using it, they didn't, and it was so expensive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when the drug is first released, sometimes it's a lot more expensive because of the fact that the development costs for these drugs are just not cheap. You're thinking about just the human clinical trials of itself are hundreds of millions or even billions of
Yeah.
dollars because you have to prove unequivocally that this product is safe. It's not going to kill anyone.
Sure.
So the FDA require you to do a lot of human clinical trials. You do your phase 1, 2s, and 3s. And phase 1 is about 80 patients, phase 2 is about 300 patients, and phase 3 is about 3,000 patients.
Right.
And on average, you're partnering with clinical trial sites and patients that actually you have to pay to participate in the human clinical trial. So it can run you anywhere from $50,000 to $200,000 per patient. And that's
Wow.
not including the drug.
Right, right,
You
right.
know, so when you multiply that by 3,000, you're like, oh, okay, so you're spending a lot of money to prove that this drug is actually not only efficacious, but it's definitely safe, and I can give this to my loved one and not worry that they're gonna, all of a sudden die.
Right. Speaking of dying, let's go back to lithium. I don't know why I
Okay.
said that. That's
I like lithium. It doesn't kill you though. I like
okay. So,
lithium. It's bipolar disorder, but it's used for Alzheimer's. It can be
right. So
used
there's
for
a lot of
Alzheimer's.
drugs that are, off marketed. They're off
Yes.
label marketed for different sort of things. Some in a bad way, some in a good way. Hopefully,
Yes.
this lithium is in a good way. But how do we know? For instance, let's use Depakote as an example. My mom was given Depakote, off-label drug for epilepsy,
Yes.
anti-seizure drug. I wasn't told about it. It actually is a black box drug for
Yes.
back label drug for people with dementia and Alzheimer's. Actually, Rick Moncastle, he also led prosecution against Abbott Labs for
Yes.
off-marketing Depakote because my mom ended up. She was a very vivacious, healthy, physically healthy human being, and she became immobile and incontinent after
Yes.
just a month or so with Depakote. So because all the semblance and immobility that
Build
it
it,
creates, you lose, especially someone with Alzheimer's, you forget you forget how to walk anymore. You forget how to
Exactly.
hold
It
your
was
urine in.
permanent. It was a
So
permanent.
How
the-
Yeah,
to
it was
talk
permanent.
exactly.
So how do we know that lithium? What do you do to safeguard that it isn't a black label drug on somebody with dementia? Because it seems like they are very sensitive to many drugs.
So lithium is considered to be a narrow therapeutic index drug, and it does have a black box warning. So basically, you have to, if you're on a lithium regimen, you have to have your blood monitored. So it's considered to be, it's a therapeutic monitoring drug. So you have to you basically have to monitor your blood if you are on a lithium regimen, because high dosage of it, can be toxic to your renal glands, your kidneys, etc. And so you want to make sure that you do check in with your doctor. However, lithium is proven, tried and true, to be the gold standard for bipolar disorder. It is the number one drug for bipolar. And for most antidepressants, if you're taking it for depression, you have to sometimes you have to take a lithium as an adjunctive therapy in combination with your antidepressant, because it helps with suicidal thoughts or suicidal ideation. So that's kind of the benefits of lithium, so and it's probably one of the most studied drugs. There have been over 500, human clinical trials with lithium, and over 5,500 periodicals, articles that have been written, about lithium being studied for everything neurodegenerative, which is Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, MS, ALS, traumatic brain injury, even Down syndrome. And it's also been studied for psychiatric disorders. So we're talking about depression, PTSD, and bipolar disorder. So it's just wildly known. And what we have just released, we released data from our phase 2A multiple ascending dose study that showed that at the maximum tolerated dose of our product, the next generation lithium, and I'll go into what the ingredients are. We came up with a dosage of 240 milligram equivalent of lithium carbonate. And just so, in terms of context, the average, the recommended dosage of patients with bipolar disorder or even depression or PTSD is about 300 milligrams. So we came, so even at a maximum dosage of our drug would be about 240 milligrams, which is 20% less lithium that you're taking. And, and we hypothesize that at this dosage, our product will not require therapeutic drug monitoring. So it's much safer. So it would minimize the side effects.
So you're saying that though that you're finding that, or you found that the lithium, this isn't used for agitation with someone with dementia, or is that it can be?
It has been in recent clinical trials, not our product, but lithium carbonate has been studied. And if you were to go to clinicaltrials.gov, or even like you just Google on on different periodicals in general, you'll see that lithium carbonate has been used for agitation with patients with Alzheimer's. It's even been used at a low dosage because, with neurodegenerative diseases, they say that lithium you will not have to use a high dose that you're using for people with bipolar disorder or depression or PTSD. You can use a much lower dosage that's much safer, and it will help with cognition, associative learning, and as well as the reduction of plaque within the brain because it's very neuroprotective.
And so is this available now, or this is what you're working on? Or?
So our product we're working on, our next generation lithium. We just completed our phase 2A. So we're working diligently to get to move into our phase 2B in patients with Alzheimer's. But then we're also working to get into phase 2As for patients with bipolar disorder, which is low-hanging fruit, of course, major depressive disorder, and PTSD. Because even though we have a product that's really beneficial for Alzheimer's, which is basically what our goal is, because we do have family members who are afflicted with this disease, we also don't want to forget the patients who are suffering from bipolar disorder, major depressive disorder, and PTSD. I can tell you a story. One of my best friends, her and her husband came home from dinner and saw the daughter in the living room. She broke into my friend's husband's safe, got the gun, and had it to her mouth. Oof. And she was going to commit suicide. And they caught her just in time. And so it's one of and then they found out not only is she very depressed, but she is also somewhat suicidal. And after a round of tests, it took about a year, and figured out that she does suffer from bipolar disorder, and of course, then she got on the hamster wheel of the plethora of medications that's out there, and you just have to really find the right one that's good for you, and it's just devastating when you get to that point because, how do you find the right one to titrate?
Have you found that there are, and I don't know what the side effects are the side effects different for each disorder? So for bipolar, for PTSD, for MDD, or for Alzheimer's, has lithium shown different side effects? And if so, how do we overcome those?
So thus far, we're seeing that our product is highly tolerable. And we've reported that. So because our lithium is lithium, salicylate, and proline combined, and then it's co-crystallized. So we have an ionic co-crystal delivering lithium comprised of basically salicylate and proline. And so what happens is salicylate or salicylic acid is an aspirin, which is an anti-inflammatory. So we combine that with an amino acid proline and lithium, and then it's co-crystallized. So picture sugar or salt crystals. And what that makes the product, it gives it greater bioavailability and greater biodistribution, which means that your body absorbs and processes it so much better, more efficiently. And so basically, and it allows the product, which is lithium, to get basically to the site of action. The goal is to get lithium to the brain and spare the body of the toxicity, because the brain is where lithium does its magic. It's neuroprotective, and it helps to reduce the plaque buildup within the brain. And so how do we get it to the brain without basically messing up your internal organs? And we believe that the combination that we have, and by also making it a co-crystal, really does help that. And thus far, we've been showing that. Because it is a co-crystal, it allows you to also administer a lower dosage, and you get a higher therapeutic index. So our phase 1, we compared our product in a bioequivalent study. We compared the equivalent of 150 milligram of lithium carbonate of our product to the 300 milligram of lithium carbonate, and we achieved bioequivalent, which means that pretty much you have the similar product but less the dosage.
Right.
Which you should see minimal side effects with that.
Which is excellent.
What are some of the side effects? I mean, what are the side effects of lithium?
So the side effects of lithium are nausea, vomiting, the typical things that that are with some of these drugs. So indigestion, diarrhea. And so with that, having a lower dosage of a product on the market, makes it a little bit safer. So our goal is how can we help our family and your family, with a product, to put a product in the market that's much safer than something that we know to be the gold standard of what's out there. So picture like a better aspirin.
Right.
Gotcha.
Let me ask you a question though, and I'm not to be confrontive about it, but just to be blunt. But just to be blunt, like, why are you the ones that discovered that lithium can remove plaque when this is like are you the only ones that have known this?
No,
or is this,
no, we're not. No, we're not the ones. So this product we licensed from the University of South Florida.
Okay.
Because the inventors of this technology, like I said before, there's been over 500 human clinical trials that have been conducted on lithium carbonate, and over 5,500 periodicals have been written about lithium carbonate. So lithium is well documented and characterized. So everything about lithium under the sun. It's just that it requires therapeutic drug monitoring, and it's also off patent, so it's not prescribed as much.
Right. I'm just wondering about the plaque, the removal of plaque. Like how does
the removal of plaque, that came from human clinical trials that have been conducted that showed that, hey, this product actually does. So there've been phase 2 studies that show that for efficacy for lithium carbonate that showed that, hey, this product is actually viable for Alzheimer's. So why are we not using it?
Absolutely.
So it's one of those things that it hasn't gone through a phase 3 because of course the product is off patented, but it hasn't gone through a phase 3 to get approval from the FDA for that specific indication. The only indication that lithium is approved for by the FDA is for bipolar disorder. However, it is used off-label for major depressive disorder and PTSD.
Right. And now we want to you're trying to push it through for Alzheimer's.
So we've come up with a next generation lithium that we want to go for Alzheimer's as well as bipolar disorder, major depressive disorder, and PTSD. Right. We want to come up with we have a newer, potentially safer, better version of this product to put on the market that'll actually move the dial and help millions of people within the United States. This product alone can help about 43 million people. Right. Globally, about 600 million people.
Right. So for me, it sounds like a miracle drug for me, because you're saying that it helps with agitation, which is a big issue and problem with Alzheimer's and dementia. That's one of the things that it makes it, caregiving for someone that you love so difficult, because the agitation is just, is a manifestation it's unavoidable in some cases, and it can be really, really devastating for both the person and the person's loved one and the caregivers. It also but drugs like that help in agitation, especially in our facilities that are understaffed and overworked and underpaid. That's why there tends to be abuse of those kinds of drugs, because
Absolutely.
when you say it's crystals and like a Depakote, if you remember, they were marketing it as these things called sprinkles. You just sprinkle it on top of food, right? It sounds cute. Oh, let's give Norma some sprinkles. I'm going to give you some sprinkles today, Norma.
It's a way of it's a way of trying to deliver the product to patients that can't swallow pills, of course.
Right.
So they'll do it actually as a sachet, like basically something sprinkles that they sprinkle on the foods, or they'll do it as a basically a liquid dissolution where you can pretty much give them the liquid version of the pill, which makes it a little bit better. But definitely having something like lithium, a next generation lithium that's a little bit safer for patients with Alzheimer's to take and to help with associative learning and even agitation. I mean, that's great. It gives them a little focus. It gives them back their life or some semblance of independence, which is most important, because I think one of the major factors that, I don't know about you, but for me, of putting my uncle into a facility was the agitation. Once you become unrecognizable to them and they get extremely agitated, there's really nothing you can do, because you just can't calm them down. There's nothing you can, and it's devastating.
Right. There are behavioral ways to do it. It just takes time. Mm-hmm. It takes manpower. But again, I'm going to go back to how the responsibility of a pharmaceutical manufacturer, okay, as yourself. The responsibility for you, that I am saying out loud, how can you help with the responsibility of this abuse that happens with drugs in these situations of nonprofit, for-profit, long-term care facilities that rely on this kind of tool to help ease their day and make it easier for themselves, when it actually exasperates the disease.
So that becomes more of a systemic, somewhat issue. Yeah, I think I was reading an article about the HHS, Health and Human Services. I think I was reading an article. I think it was most recently this morning when they were talking about kind of establishing guidelines for nursing home. To say exactly, and I think one of the things in terms of you have to make sure that you're not understaffed. You know what I mean? Like one of those things and you can't give a staff like, okay, for example, like my uncle's nursing home is kind of like you have one nurse's aide is responsible for 8 people during her 8-hour shift. And it's going to take her about 2 hours per person. So it's kind of like that's
math.
Not going to happen, or
Yeah.
him or her is going to take them, that time. It's kind of like they don't have the time to get through the certain amount of patients in that time. It's just not feasible, So I think it's a lot of and as a result, they said, well, hey, why don't you just do this, And the person isn't really getting the care that they really do need. It's difficult, It's something that you look at. Whether you're looking at, is a systemic
It is a systemic issue, yes,
definitely. Is it a funding issue? Does this need to be heavily subsidized? Like what happens? There's no way that, you have this person who worked their entire lives, paid their taxes, was an upstanding citizen. Then at the end, of their lives, they're pretty much relegated. It's pretty much useless in a comatose state on some kind of medication. Exactly, which it's just not right.
So how can we, I hear you, this is what my documentary is about, I hear you 100%, but what can the pharmaceutical, how can we, probably if Rick Moncastle was watching this, he's cracking up and shaking his head and going,
he won't say at pharmaceuticals, biotech. See, we're smaller.
Okay, you're smaller.
Thus far. So we were founded in 2016, and thus far we're publicly traded, and we have gone public in 2021. And thus far, we've raised a little bit over $30 million. And so we're pretty much, the low on the totem pole.
Right.
And we have been scrappy and nimble. We have 4 full-time employees, 3 part-time employees. So when you think about what we have accomplished, when we think about, the average biotech, has a staff of 50, and they have in their war chest a little bit over, $200 million.
Sure.
So we have spent, pretty much over 90% of our capital that we've raised to, to develop these products, because our goal is really to get something on the market as quickly as possible that'll benefit, all these people. So, so we're not in the same.
What is Alzamend? Now I've saved it to the end. What is
Exactly.
Tell me what Alzamend is.
So Alzamend is a clinical stage biotech company working on treatments and cures, for Alzheimer's disease, bipolar disorder, major depressive disorder, and PTSD. We want to help not only our family, but your families, that are afflicted by these devastating, disease and disorders. We've been through it. We've been caregivers. We are caregivers. And so our goal is, how can we get something on the market that's much safer than what's actually on the market now? So and as mentioned before, our next generation lithium would really be, something that'll impact public health greatly, because having a product that's tried and true, but just much safer at a much lower dosage that will not require therapeutic drug monitoring, it's pretty much great for the sufferers of bipolar disorder, major depressive disorder, and PTSD. You don't want to talk about, I don't know, you see all the latest bipolar disorder commercials, and they're like, oh, but the side effects, thoughts of suicide, et cetera, et cetera. Well, then they have to use, guess what? Lithium, which is our product. So it's one of those things that it's great.
It's just scary for the layman out like us, caregivers and just regular folk who don't know a thing about it, and there's now, I think we're all frightened enough, and rightly so, to trust anything. Like there's so many platforms to market to us, as consumers, and we don't know, and
But that's why you're here. And that's the greatest thing about it. For people like you, who become advocates and say, hey, we're going to educate the public and we're going to bring these people in our podcast and we're going to talk to them. Reach out to whomever. I think you should, reach out to someone in Big Pharma and say, I'd like to have you on my podcast. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about this product in general, and is it really benefiting people? And is it being abused just like, you mentioned in Purdue Pharma and Dope Stick? Is it being abused by the patients or is it being abused by, the company, or is the physicians who are basically prescribing these drugs? It's great to have a sounding board and great to have you guys here so people can kind of, listen to your podcast and say, hey, I'm going to research. It's great that they have this person that can really help me because I'm going through the similar situation with my family member. I'm a caregiver or I'm a patient and I'm taking that, that product. This may be better for me. So I now get to go to my doctor and said, hey, these are the questions that I can actually ask because Susie said so. In a good way. You know what I mean? Like, because a lot of people, we're siloed, right? And sometimes, when either our family members or ourselves are diagnosed with something, we don't really have a wealth of resources. And sometimes, yes, I may not know Susie Carter, but what happens is I can now listen to her podcast, right. See her YouTube video and start to do some research on my own, right. And not just take, my physician or Big Pharma or someone else's word for it. Right. It kind of helped to have something out there when all it takes is Google. You just Google and all of a sudden, we're all caregivers. My mom is going through some health issues, currently. And I'm the same way. I'm like, okay, what are you taking? Let me look at all these things. I'm not a doctor, but I will, research and I'll take it, I'll talk to my physician about it, and said, okay, and let's get a second opinion. Let's get you to all these other people that, let's get a second opinion. Let's understand what we're dealing with here, because sometimes a lot of people, sometimes second opinion is all you need.
So thank you for that. So just to button this up, what do you need more people to, be part of your tests right now, or is there some way that our listeners can get involved with you to help you with your
I think it's more along the lines of, we look at it, we just wanted to be a part of this podcast to, show that there is hope, that there's a lot of organizations such as ours developing, really novel, and exciting new, products.
Totally.
That are somewhat tried and true and tested, that will be available, on the market.
Can any of our listeners,
5 to 10 years.
Can they sign up for any of your trials or anything?
And they can reach out to us. They can, look at our website. We will be posting, the upcoming clinical trials and how they can get involved and how they can get their, or sign up their loved ones to be involved in our, our human clinical trials. So that's really good.
That would be great. That would be so
Big
good.
question is, without, and I know there's so many factors involved, but without pie in the sky, when will, and I know the bipolar and the other ones are going to be first, but for Alzheimer's, when can we realistically say this is something that we will now be, will be available and for a price that people can afford? When is that?
And you can't quote me on this, but I'd probably say within the next 5 years. Yeah, exactly. You can't hold me to that because as a biotech, we are always in fundraising mode. Of course, we have investors and people do invest in our stock and everything else. But we do, I would say, if the planets and everything are aligned, I'd probably say within the next 5 years, you'll see something.
We know sometimes it can take 10 years just to get approved. Once everything is the way it's supposed to be.
We're not worried about, any of the indications we're going after. Yes, bipolar, major depressive disorder, and PTSD is more low-hanging fruit. It's what lithium has already been used for. So we're just checking a box as far as that concerned. But concerning Alzheimer's, if you do have a product in human clinical trials, once you get to your phase 2B and you do an efficacy trial and you show that there is efficacy within the product, the FDA will work with you to fast track that product, to get it through the clinic as quickly as possible. So when we talk about our vaccine, we initiated a phase 1/2A in March of this year. And so because it is, as I mentioned before, a patient-specific vaccine, you have to put it in patients with the disease. So we're putting in patients with Alzheimer's, so we'll know safety as well as efficacy. And if at the end of that study we see like great efficacy, we will meet with the FDA once again and show them the results. And if the results, like I mentioned, is built on a cancer platform, if the results are, oh my God, it reversed the effects of Alzheimer's, then the FDA is going to say that's a goal, you have to expedite the development of this drug. And also understand, I think it was under the Trump administration, they after phase 2, I think they instituted the right to try. Where if you're reading about different companies, who are working on human clinical trials, even if you can't participate in the clinical trial, you can say, hey, this product have gone past this point. Can I try it? Because, I'm suffering from this, or I'm a caregiver and my loved one is suffering from this. So, and I think that's also great too.
That is
especially
great.
if you can kind of read and you see like the safety, like it's safe.
Sure.
Hey, I want to try this as well.
And when are your next clinical trials for the vaccine?
So the vaccine is underway right now. It's initiated in March, so we'll know sometime in 2024. If of what's going on with the vaccine.
So if you can go to the next, step 2, like the next phase.
It would be a phase 2B.
And that would be in the 2024. So you'll keep us posted. And
exactly.
Yeah, because we also know the pains of fundraising. We've been fundraising for our documentary. We don't need quite as much as they do.
No.
We just need a couple.
No, you don't.
No, we did a little bit. Come on, folks. We're trying to help you. But
so how is that going in the midst of the whole strike?
Terrible.
I don't want to say that, but
terrible.
Yes.
It's terrible.
Yes.
I mean, there's a big old word called ageism that really, doesn't make it a very sexy arena to play in. Yeah, we are. No country for old people has to get out. We need good drugs for Alzheimer's and for people that are suffering with mental challenges in all ways, and that includes dementia, Alzheimer's, bipolar disease, PTSD, all of them. And this is our lane. Our lane right now is and you have your lane, but you know what? They all meet.
I hope it works, because I believe in what you guys are doing. I think that's fantastic. And, and any help that we can, if we were a big pharma, I would fund it.
I know. We just need we need a couple $100,000. That's all we need is a couple $100,000.
If we were a big pharma, I'd fund it. But unfortunately, we're trying to get some drugs.
I hear you, baby.
And it's not cheap.
Hear you. No, I hear you, baby. But we just need a couple hundred. So, that's all we need.
Anyone.
Okay,
But listen, thank you so much for taking time with us today. You're a delightful human being.
Time.
And we're rooting for you. Get this.
Thank you.
Get it done,
we
man.
will. We're relentless. We're going to keep persevering until it happens. So thank you very much.
Wonderful. Bless your heart.
Fabulous.
Well, that was good, Don.
Yes.
That was good.
That was, I think we have preconceived notions sometimes about it. You hear pharma or pharmaceutical, and you're like, ugh.
Yeah. But you know what? I still have that a little bit of the
I know.
Because and it's not Stephan, and it's not Alzamend or anything like. It's just the whole industry.
We have PTSD. Yeah, we have PTSD.
We have PTSD.
About it.
Yes, we do.
It's
We
true.
need some lithium.
We need lithium. Absolutely.
Give us some lithium now.
Toot sweet. Toot sweet.
Because honestly, I wanted to grill the hell out of him, and I couldn't because he's such a nice person. And I feel like, well, maybe, and you don't want to obviously we want people that are passionate, and of course everything is a business, and you have to, I'm Pollyanna. I'm like, well, in my mind, I think, well, you're making money out of it, so you must be nefarious,
Right.
Of course
And they're
not.
they're not pharma though. They're the tech.
But they are going to have to, they're going
They have to
you're
partner.
right.
They have to partner with with
And then
pharma.
once it
Yeah.
leaves their hand, then it goes into the pharma,
and then into the
that's when
marketing and blah, 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 yeah, all that stuff.
Yeah, so it gets all crazy. But in the meantime, I hope that everybody got a lot out of this. I did, because, I haven't talked to a biotech company before, so this was interesting.
No.
And to find out, how these trials go and how long it takes. It takes so freaking long.
Well, it has to.
it's-
I mean, if
I
it was
know.
too short, you'd be a little worried if
No, I
they
know.
didn't take their time. Yeah.
Worked on my dog. Let's go.
He's coming from a place, and it sounds like everyone in the company all has been touched. They're all caregivers, as he stated. His uncle, and they're going. So it's more on just a business level. It's on a personal level, and it comes from love, right? I think it comes from love.
It does come
Did I do
from
good?
love.
It
That
does,
was great.
and you know why?
Because
I
love
know.
is powerful.
Well, love is powerful, yes, and love is
contagious.
And that's right.
And
And love
love
conquers
conquers
alls.
alls. And we thank you all
Thank
so
you.
much. And if you like us, please share and keep listening to us. We have a lot of great guests coming up, and like Ashton Applewhite, if you haven't listened to our last podcast, please do. She's amazing, along with
Yeah.
so many of our other guests. And have a wonderful day. We love you. Bye.